everybody, and welcome back to my channel, and happy Saturday if you happen to be watching this on a Saturday. I'm filming this currently on a Saturday afternoon, and there's a bunch of cars going by, and I live on a main highway, so if you hear some noise rumbling around, that's what you're hearing. Today's video is going to be a much awaited and highly anticipated video. Well, for me and nobody else, probably, but it's going to be on the M. Graham Artist Gouache. So this video is going to be me just sort of doing an unboxing, first impressions, setting up my palette, that kind of a video. I'm very excited to try these gouache because I love the M. Graham watercolors. They are my favorite. M. Graham is my favorite brand for artist paints pretty much across the board because color for color, they have the most pigment of any other brand in their watercolors at least. So I am very excited to try their gouache. Now I do have experience with the Winsor & Newton's designer gouache, and I like that gouache very much, but you cannot palette it except the white, the permanent white, which by the way, they have the best white in the world. I'm just saying, their white gouache is the best. But I've had luck. I've had some pretty good success paletting their white gouache. That's it right here, which it's coming out of here because I'm going to end up putting it in this palette since I will be using the Winsor & Newton white gouache with these paints. Now, if you saw my latest haul video, then you would know why. It's because I did pick up the M. Graham's titanium white, but I then realized on the back, it says caution, read back panel, and on the back it says caution contains lead compounds, cadmium and lead compounds, which, you know, I'll let you use your best judgment on whether or not you would like to purchase their white gouache knowing that it has the cadmium and the lead in it. The lead's the big one for me. You know, it's kind of a big one for me. So for me personally, my standards, my health, my boundaries, I'm not going to be using this for that reason. However, none of the other colors seem to have it, so we're going to carry on and we're going to set up this palette. I'm going to give you some of my overall first impressions. I do not do first impression reviews. I think they're ridiculous. If you've been watching my channel for any period of time, then you would already know that. But I am going to be swatching these out and playing around with them a little bit in this video, and eventually a little while down the road, after I've done a couple paintings with them, then and only then will I do a full and comprehensive review. But that's not today's video. So let me show you real quick the colors that I got to set up this palette. I purchased Azo Yellow, which Azo Yellow is a favorite color of mine in their watercolor, and it's one of my favorite yellows in general. It's PY151. This is about the coldest yellow that you can get without going toward the greenish side of things. Like Hansa Yellow Light, for example, PY3, is got that greenish tint to it. It's almost dirty looking because of it. So this is a nice, clear, cool kind of spectrum yellow, and I really love that. I purchased Gouache for my warm yellow, Phthalo Red, Pyrrole Red, which I'm a little disappointed because I never thought to look, but it's not a single pigment color. Their watercolor Pyrrole Red is. It's just pure Pyrrole Red, but in their gouache version, they've also added PR209. So I'm a little disappointed in that, but carrying on, I also got Quinacridone Rose, Quinacridone Violet, Dioxazon Purple, Ultramarine Blue, Phthalo Blue, Sap Green, Yellow Ochre, and Burnt Sienna. Now, to put this palette together, I purchased this palette from Blick.com. This is their in-house brand, and I'm pretty happy with it. It was only like $11. It's like the cheapest watercolor metal sketcher box that I have ever purchased, and it's really decent quality, I have to say, for the price. It's not going to be the same quality you can expect from like Winsor & Newton, for example, or Schminke, but you know, for $11, it is finished all the way around. It seems decent quality. The only thing that kind of bugs me is that the insert shakes around in there quite a bit. So I'm going to have to put some poster putty or something like that to keep it from moving because it's too big really for the palette, but that's all right. And of course I have the half pans ready to go. Now, one thing that I do actually really like about this palette is that I can fit 6 additional half pans down the center row. So I can convert this 12 pan palette into an 18 color palette should I decide to expand. And let's be honest, if I really like these, I probably will pick up some more colors. Although the color selection for their gouache is pretty limited, I do have almost the full color range for their watercolors, and I'm going to be comparing their watercolor counterparts to the gouache just to see what the differences would be, and I'll probably do that pretty in depth in my review. But the gouache range of colors is much more limited than that. But, you know, they have every color that you would certainly need, and that's what's important. For the swatch chart that I'm going to make for this palette, I'm going to be using the Aqua Bee paper from the Bee Paper Company. Now, they don't make this anymore, and for good reason, because I'm sorry to say, but this paper was terrible. I'm just going to be really honest with you. I never believed this was 100% cotton, just because when I work on this surface, it feels more like a wood pulp paper and it responds the same way. It dries unevenly. It's just, it's not the best paper in the world, but I managed to get some use out of it. I did use about half the pack up as a makeshift pastel paper. I went ahead and I added some pastel ground to the surface. In fact, I used that paper with the pastel ground on the top of it for my pears painting that I did with the Mount Vision pastel. So I'll link that up if you guys are interested. But for gouache, there's nothing wrong with that paper. It's perfectly fine. So I'm going to be using that to make the swatch chart, and let's get on setting up the palette. Alright, so the very first thing that I did is I just cut out from that watercolor paper an insert, and I want to make sure that that insert will fit in the top of my palette, and it will. So I'm going to have 6 pans across the top and 6 pans across the bottom, which will make a total of 12 pans. I used my Micron pens, which are waterproof ink, so that I could make the little outline for the chart. I keep going to call these Macron pens, but Macrons is something different. That is definitely not what we're working with today. And I want to decide kind of the overall orientation of where everything's going to go in the palette, and I decided that I'm going to have my 6 warmer colors on the top and my 6 cooler colors and earth tones on the bottom. So I'm going to do it in like a spectral order, starting with the yellows, moving into the reds, purple, blue, green, and then the earths. And it's really important to me that I take some of this ink, and I am going to, I wasn't sure if I wanted to do just a strip of ink across each one to see what the transparency would be, but now I'm kind of wondering if I would rather fill in half of each one of these squares with some black, like P.H. Martin's ink. So half the square would be white, half of it would be black, just so that I could see the opacity really well at a glance for each of these colors. Maybe we'll do that. And then I'm going to write down the color name underneath each one and the pigment information, because that's something that's important to me. So I will go ahead, fill all that in, and then I'll check back in just a minute. Alright, so I finished my little swatch chart here. I was able to get the color name there and the pigment information for each one. And I was able to write so tiny because I'm using my Micron pen in the number 02. They actually have one that's even smaller in 005, but I didn't think it was necessary. And I've got that. It's fitting in there. I'm happy with that. I've got my little half pans all ready to go inside the metal box, and I'm just going to start filling these now. So I'm going to make sure that I put them in the order that I want. Now here's the thing about filling up half pans for the first time, whether you're doing watercolor or gouache, especially M. Graham's, because they use honey as the binder, some of them can be a little runny and messy and kind of get all over the place. So that's why I don't like to use paint from the tube fresh, because it often runs all over the place and you get big gobs, and it's just not super convenient. But I'm gonna start filling this up now, and you can watch the speed version of this if you like. Alright, so I just want to actually pause the video and give you a little update. Like, See what I mean by how runny? And like, it's a brand new tube. I just opened it and like, they're running all over the place. Now again, it's nothing against M. Graham and it's nothing against these paints, but some of them can be very, very runny and not fun to work with like that. So that's why I like to let paint dry and use it from the pan. But now it's like, well, I don't want to, if I close it like that, then it's gonna harden and you'll never be able to get the paint open again. So I gotta clean all that out and I don't want to waste that paint. So I just got done squeezing out all the paints into the tubes and I'm gonna do some swatches here, but I wanted to show you that the textures are very inconsistent, and I'll insert a close-up pic so you can see it. I'm not used to this texture with gouache. Some of them look kind of like Hershey Kisses, so they're the texture that I would normally expect with gouache, like a soft toothpaste. But then others, like the Phthalo blue, is straight up liquid. Like, it's self-leveling in there. I didn't level that off. That's just, it just poured out really messy. Same thing with the Pyrrole Red. And a couple of the other colors, they're all different textures, so that I found to be really strange, and I'm not used to it being so runny. Not saying that's a bad thing, I'm not saying anything bad about the gouache, I'm just saying I'm not used to that texture. Alright, so why don't we start with the first color. The first color that I have is Azo Yellow. So I'm just kind of mixing it off to the side on a porcelain dish so I can make sure there's not going to be any gobs. And I'm going to come in, I'm going to apply the first layer. Now maybe I didn't get quite enough, let's see. Maybe I could put a little bit more. No, that's pretty fair, I think. Alright, so that is the Azo Yellow. I would call that semi-opaque. I don't think that's as opaque as, for example, Winsor & Newton Designer Gouache. The primary yellow is more opaque than this, but that is what it is. Let's go to the next color I have is Gouache. So I'm just going to work that off onto the palette. They are very smooth and creamy. I feel like, unlike the Winsor & Newton, which I feel like you couldn't really use at full strength. You couldn't use the Winsor & Newton straight from the tube. You had to add a little bit of water to get the paint to flow some. These I feel like I could use right from the tube at full strength because there's no brush drag. They're not sticky or dry, but that opacity isn't quite what I'm accustomed to either. Now, they did say on their website that their gouache has no opacifiers added or chalk or bulking agents. It's just pure pigment, so that you can mix with white to adjust the opacity however much you like. This is the Naphthalene Red. I noticed that paper is not, the paint's not staying exactly where I put it in the squares. That's not anything against the paint, that's the paper. It's like bleeding outside the edges where I put it. And that is like full strength, right from the tube. And most of the time I'm not going to use it at full strength right from the tube. So, but that's the opacity that we can get with Naphthalene Red. Okay, right. The next shade that I have is the Pyrrole Red. I'm going to add just a little bit of water to get it nice and flowy. These are very pigmented, and I mean very pigmented. You can tell there's a lot of pigment here. So this is the Pyrrole Red. I think it's a little more opaque than the Naphthalene Red maybe. Very close. Those colors are very, very close. Here is the Quinacridone Rose. These do have a really nice, smooth, kind of buttery texture. I like the texture of these much better than the Winsor & Newton. But I think I prefer the opacity of Winsor & Newton's, because there's the Quinacridone Rose, and you can see that's, in my opinion, that's pretty much semi-transparent. I mean, it's not that there's no pigment, it's just that they're definitely not as opaque as the Winsor & Newton. Now, I'm sure I can add white, like they suggest, to get more opacity, but the Winsor & Newton already has the opacity and the immediacy of that. So, not sure how I feel about this. Not sure how I feel about this. Alright, the Quinacridone Violet. I'll work that out on the side here. That one feels a little stickier maybe than the others. Let me get that one. This is PV19 as well, but you can see how different two PV19s can be side by side right next to one another. This has very good pigment, but the opacity is just not there. This is basically transparent. So now, one of the things that makes gouache different from watercolor is that there's a higher pigment to binder ratio. And I would think that would be the case with these, absolutely. But the other thing is that they should be very opaque, usually. And just taking a quick glance here at the first 6 colors I've swatched, I would say that these are semi-transparent, most of them. And as that Pyrrole Red dried, it dried more transparent than the Naphthalene Red. So I'd steer you toward the Naphthalene Red over the Pyrrole Red. Just because A, it's a single pigment, and B, it does seem to be more opaque. The next color that I'm going to swatch here would be the Dioxazon Violet. So let me go ahead and work that out on the plate a little bit before bringing it over. So I don't want there to be any big gobs or anything. And now see, Dioxazon Violet in mass tone is almost black. So testing the opacity of that one, it's anybody's guess, but I would think that is definitely pretty similar to the Quinacridone Violet. The Quinacridone Violet is flat out transparent. As it's drying, you cannot see it over the black strip at all. One of the advantages of working in gouache is that you can work on tinted paper, but not with these, you guys. I don't think these are going to be a good option for that. I've got the Ultramarine Blue. Yeah, that ain't right. To me, that's not right. So there it is. Full strength right out of the tube. I mean, the color is very beautiful, and I can tell there's a lot of pigment. But where is the opacity? There's no real... Okay, I'm going to go into the Phthalo Blue now, which they're calling it Phthalo Blue Primary. Oh, that's like liquid in this. It's seriously like liquid, you guys. I hope that dries down a little bit in my pan, because it's seriously like liquid. It's just poured out of there like a liquid watercolor. I'm not adding any water to that because it's already water. And it's very transparent. Huh. Wow. Okay. That is Phthalo Blue Primary. It's interesting because, and I'll do bigger swatches later on, especially for my review, but here is Winsor & Newton's Primary Blue. And of course it's not as dark, you know, they've added chalk absolutely to their designer gouache, the Winsor & Newton company. There's no question. And in fact, in thicker applications, you can kind of see it starting to flake or flake or kind of like crack a little bit because of all that chalk in there, but they're very opaque immediately. Yeah, so I mean, I could probably add white to that, and we're going to try that in a little bit and see if we can get close to the Winsor & Newton's primary blue, or a little bit closer to the sap green, which I should work out a little tiny bit on the side before I come in with that. I don't want there to be big gobs. So here's the sap green. All right, now that's much better. See that? That is good opacity, good coverage. That's how I think gouache should be. That right there, that's good. That's the way they all should be. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with this gouache. Again, it's a first impression. I'm sure that sound was lovely on camera. That's what you guys tune into. That's what you guys tune in for. That is the kind of quality content that you guys tune in for. All right, let's go ahead and try the yellow ochre. Which there's the yellow ochre starting to dry already in the pan. Add a little bit of water to that just to get it flowing some. And I'm just adding the tiniest bit because I want it at full strength. There you go. There you go. That color came to party. Look at that. The opacity is very good with that one. There it is. Beautiful. That's how I want them all to be. Like, if they're going to be transparent, then I'm just going to use watercolor. So, I don't know. I mean, they're definitely more opaque than watercolor, but, you know. Now, I didn't fill these pans all the way either because I kind of have a feeling that gouache doesn't last as long in a half pan, even if it does hang together. It's not going to last as long in a pan as a watercolor, I think, so I'll refill it more often, but I'd get fresher paint, so that would be fine. Here's the burnt sienna. Look how opaque that is. That's nice. That's covering it up. So if you want to work on tinted paper, I guess perhaps if I had chose cadmium colors, like a cadmium yellows, cadmium reds, I would have been a little happier, and cobalt blues. But I don't like to work with toxic pigments in my studio, so I'm going to do a close-up, insert a picture of the color chart after it dries so we can see everything very accurately, and then I'll join you back here. Alright, so I have allowed the paint swatches to dry. But the paint is still wet in here, most of them. But some of the colors that are drying quicker would be the ones that are a thicker consistency, like the Quin Rose, Quin Violet, the Burnt Sienna, Yellow Ochre, Ultramarine Blue. They're all drying the quickest in there. But like I said, some of them are downright a liquid consistency. That Phthalo Blue is like, it's like liquid. It's like liquid watercolor in there. So I don't know what to say about that. But I've made a little discovery, and this is interesting and not something that I would have expected, but last night I took, because I'd received these paints in the mail last night, I took a couple of the colors, the Ultramarine Blue, Sap Green, Pyrrole Red, and the Naphthalene Red, and I left them to dry on the plate because I wanted to see how well I'd be able to re-wet them. And they do re-wet very well. It's certainly not as well as their watercolors, but they re-wet pretty good. But I had thought that, and of course I did it on this tiny little scrap, but I had put a strip of black ink down underneath both these. You can't see it because the sap green really is nice and opaque. But this is from the re-wet paint that I had on that plate. And this is fresh from the tube. And I actually think that the paint that I re-wet was more concentrated and had a little bit better coverage. So I went and I'm not sure why that would be 100%, but I went and I tested the theory over here. This is the Pyrrole Red. This is the one that was re-wet from last night that I'd let dry overnight. And this is fresh from the tube. And I thought I had to use more fresh from the tube to get a similar coverage. So, and I do think, once again, I think there's more pigment, or maybe not more pigment, but just better results with the paint that I had re-wet. I feel like it's a little bit more concentrated, so that is very good. But overall, a lot of the colors are pretty transparent, and maybe it's just the colors I chose. I'm not 100% sure. But so I did experiment with mixing some white into these colors here. This is Winsor Newton Designer's White Gouache, because the color they're calling their primary blue is the Phthalo blue, same pigment. And I wanted to see with adding white if I could get close to Winsor Newton's primary blue. And I do think I got much closer, but it's definitely not as bright and clear looking. I think that it's a little bit undersaturated or desaturated compared to Winsor Newton's, and I still don't think it has the same level of opacity or coverage. So, and then I mixed the white with the Ultramarine Blue, and I like that, but I don't know, you guys. I'm a little bit disappointed in the opacity because they're definitely not as opaque or as good coverage as the Winsor Newtons. So, but the downside of the Winsor Newtons was I couldn't palette them, and I really don't like to work from fresh paint most of the time. So, I don't know, you guys. I'll definitely have to do a couple paintings with them and play around with them some more before I can do a full review. But first impressions so far, I think that the paints are very creamy. Fresh from the tube, I feel like most of the colors can be used at full strength, as where a lot of other brands of gouache I've used, you do have to add some water to get it flowing some because there's a lot of brush drag. These have no brush drag. These are very smooth, very creamy, very buttery, and that's likely due to the honey binder. The pigments are very vibrant, and I do think they're very pigmented, but because they don't add any chalk or bulking agents or opacifiers, it's going to be down to the nature of the pigment itself. So like Pyrrole Red is pretty good. Ultramarine's pretty good. The best ones I have here are going to be the Sap Green, Yellow Ochre, and Burnt Sienna. They have the best coverage, and I really wish they all had that coverage because you really can't glaze with gouache. Like, you kind of can sneak a little glaze in there here and there, but especially with the grams, I don't really think that you can glaze. Let me try, because of the honey in there, because they re-wet so easy, I'm going to try a little bit, try to sneak a little Ultramarine Blue glaze. Let's try that. Why not right over this this Sap Green? Let's try that. And this is 100% cotton paper, so that'll give us an idea. Yeah, I mean, I guess you can. But I kind of feel like if I'm going over the thicker area, it's going to start bleeding. So, yeah, that's re-wetting. So it depends on how much paint you have down. You kind of can sneak a glaze in there as long as you didn't apply the paint too thickly. But if you applied it very thick, like fresh from the tube, and you didn't add any water, then you're not gonna be able to glaze because the paint re-wets and reactivates so well that you know, it's gonna start coming back up again. But you can glaze to a degree, especially if you haven't put too much down. So I guess that's kind of an advantage of them being a little bit more transparent, some of the colors. So I don't know, you guys. I don't know how I feel about this paint yet. This is not helpful in that regard, I suppose. But I do hope that you at least found this video enjoyable and got some value from the video. If you did, don't forget to give me a thumbs up and subscribe for more videos. And as always, have a great day, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye.